she helped shape how generations of women saw themselves. Now, Myrna Blyth is telling the truth about aging, ageism, reinvention, and what really matters. Stay tuned. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara, and this is Age Better. Today's episode is part of my Road to 70 series, and I am especially excited about this conversation because my guest is Myrna Blyth. Myrna has had an extraordinary career. She helped shape how generations of women saw themselves through major magazines like Ladies' Home Journal, More Magazine, which she founded, and until recently as editorial director of AARP Media, which includes the world's largest circulation publication, AARP, the magazine. And she is still evolving, still speaking up, and still challenging the way we think about, talk about, and write about aging. In this episode, we discuss ageism, why it remains so incredibly widespread, how media has helped shape stereotypes about older women, and why Myrna believes growth, curiosity, and adaptation matter at every stage of life. But we also talk about her terrific new Substack magazine, Editor's Journal, where she writes in a more personal voice about aging and culture and the, oh my gosh, so many fascinating people that she has known along the way. But this conversation is about more than her remarkable career, and it has been remarkable. It is also about what Myrna knows now and what she wants to share with us, and what women like you and me really need to understand about growing older with honesty, purpose, and a lot of confidence. Okay, everyone, get ready to age better. Myrna, welcome to Age Better.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. We've known each other for a while now. I mean, I knew about you for many, 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 many years, especially back when I was in the publishing world early on in my career, but I never actually met you. I may have seen you at an event or some publishing awards thing or what have you, but then we actually met shortly before you went over to AARP, which we will get to. So you've had like a storied career and life. I mean, you've met almost everybody worth knowing in politics and other places.
Yeah.
Yeah. But today we're going to talk about a lot of that, but we're also going to talk about what you're doing right now. So we're going to kind of start from like now and work our way backward a little bit.
Okay. Better to start now. Or even to look forward, as I learned from one of your recent podcasts.
I know. Never look back. Thank you for that. Right. With Tara Parker Pope. Also in a wonderful career. So anyway, you have started a Substack personal magazine, as you're calling it, called Editor's Journal. Tell us about that and why was now the right time to do this magazine?
Oddly enough, I worked at AARP for 13 years, and I started when I was 73. So as I always say, AARP is the one place you cannot get too old to work there, and maybe the only organization in the world. But anyway, when I left in June, though they did not ask me to leave, it's the only organization in the world where they don't ask you to leave, no matter how old you are. And all good cheers for them for that.
Absolutely. We should all be so lucky.
Yes, it's true. It's very unusual. And when talking about people going into retirement, this often happens much, much younger for people. But when I left AARP, I spent a few months in the country, swimming, enjoying myself. And then I thought, in about September, I better figure out something more to do. I am taking a doctorate. I had taken a master's degree during the pandemic because, as I say, I got really bored just streaming and working online. And so I took a master's online at Johns Hopkins. And now I'm taking a doctorate at Georgetown. And even though I'm supposed to go there, they are letting me take it online. So that's been time consuming and of interest too. But I also felt I wanted to do something more. I had done some writing in the summer. I said, and I remembered that when I stopped being the editor of the journal, I had written a column for the National Review. And I had done it for about 2 years. And I realized I liked writing a column, having a weekly commentary of some kind. And that everyone told me was Substack. So I started a Substack in January, and it's been about 3 months now.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. And you usually post like once a week.
I post once a week. At the beginning, I posted twice a week. But since I realized that subscribers get it, it almost seemed to me too much that a once a week column is a good column, unless there's something I absolutely feel I want to say the next day.
I agree with you. And that's something I grapple with. I totally agree with that. I mean, this podcast is weekly, and I always like to do a little story about it with a link to listen if they want to on Substack, on my Substack newsletter. But then if something pops up that I think, oh my gosh, this audience must know about it, I have to write a Substack thing. And not like yesterday I did that. And yet today was the weekly podcast Substack. So I feel like I have to be careful. Like my enthusiasm for wanting to share could maybe be a little bit too much. So I think your instinct is right. I have to control myself.
Even though I've tried to written about the past, about personal things about my life.
Yes,
I
very
also have
personal things.
found it's important to write about what's happening. And so I did a Substack about JFK Jr. because I was watching Love Story as long as, with millions of others. I did just this week a Substack about kind of the confusion of politics at the moment and how it's affecting me. So I want to do both looking at the past, commenting on today, and looking forward.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And, I have a personal mission. I always try to read yours before anybody else as soon as you post it. And I want to be the first person to leave a comment. And I very often am, but not always, but I try.
No, I have one really loyal reader who reads it within 2 minutes. And it's someone I know, but not that well. And he's
right there. Wait a minute. This is like a contest.
Yeah, alive and awake.
I happen to really like the one that you posted this week about your feelings about politics right now, what's going on. I mean, you have mixed feelings, and you didn't always have mixed feelings. There was a time when you were very clear, right?
When I wrote for National Review, I had very clear feelings, but it was a very different time. I also wrote a book with real political opinions that at that time were quite unusual. But now I'm, like most people, somewhat confused and about aims, goals, and even those we support, wondering maybe they are going to an extreme that we never expected in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. I have found that with your articles, your posts, that you very often speak for all of us, except, of course, when you're writing about something very personal, like recently you wrote about your brother and obesity. That was really wonderful and very heart-wrenching.
Thank you.
For sure. And beautifully written, of course. But I often find the ones that when you're reflecting on what's happening right now, like the one that you posted this week, really you're speaking on behalf of all of us. And I did say that in my comment today when I saw
and
it.
I hope so. I really hope so.
That's a goal, right?
I've found writing the Substack, and it's interesting, I'm going to keep referring back to Tara Parker, her saying about having a group of supporters. And I have found that both friends who read it and people I don't know tend to be very supportive in their comments. And that's one of the things you get out of a Substack. of communicating with people you know or don't know, who can then tell you how they feel, be supportive, sometimes critical. I haven't had much of that yet, but I'm sure I could. And it's just a good experience. It keeps you very involved in what's happening, thinking about yourself, and thinking of how to express it in a way other people will understand.
Yeah. During the conversation I had with Tara Parker Pope, and she was on the podcast. Everyone, I will have a link in the show notes to that conversation because it was really wonderful. Another great journalist. She was at the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, really great career focusing on health and wellness. And so we were talking about this pivot that she's made also to Substack, which is really fascinating. But she did reference how when she was, back when working at the legacy publications, online, like she would get really mean comments very often, like not supportive, like what you were just saying, Myrna. However, on Substack, she is finding that there's a building of a community, which is really what you're saying. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful experience.
And I think a lot of you find your own community on Substack and they help you do it through the algorithms and things like that. I'm amazed how many women over 60 and older are on Substack and how supportive they are of each other and encouraging and reading and saying they like it or restacking it. So it's a really great thing, and I'm glad I'm doing it. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And again, I'm going to bring up Tara. Again, one comment that she made was, of course, when you're working for a company and writing something, you're a little limited. You're limited as to how far you can go with a topic or, their parameters. Whereas that's not really the case here. You can say whatever you want. You have no attachments to any other company or publication. So how does that make you feel? Does that dictate what you write about?
Well, I never felt particularly constrained in the past at Ladies Home Journal. And I did remember both Ladies Home Journal and AARP, I was the editor. I was the editorial director at AARP. I was the editor at the Journal. So I didn't write. I got other people to write. And I used to say I was better at that than writing, though I discovered I'm a pretty good writer when I want to be, certainly in 1,500 to 1,800 words. That's easier. I've written 2 novels, and that wasn't as much fun as writing a Substack or even lots of Substacks. So I never felt that constrained because I knew the parameters that we were supposed to be talking about. So it didn't occur to me to find things beyond it. And again, I'm not so sure because people know who's writing and it's very personal. So I'm not so sure when you're writing personal things, whether you don't keep a little constraint on yourself. I don't know that. We'll see. We'll see
Right. We'll
how
see.
desperate I need for something to say.
So when you look back at when you were editing, when you were editorial director, you were telling other people what to write or collaborating with them so that they could go on and write or assign the stories as it goes, as the process goes. Like, do you feel that you were doing more than that?
I mean, books are the author and Substacks are the author. Magazines are the editors because it all goes through an editorial decision and a kind of trying to bring the whole thing together. I think you are very much helping to shape what everybody puts in that magazine and the whole personality of the magazine, whether it was Ladies Home Journal trying to be very informative to women, trying to be journalistic at that time, trying to give women new ideas or support them in different ways. At AARP, it was really to tell people you're still with it. You belong to AARP, congratulations, because you're in a great stage of your life. So I think the spirit of a publication comes through more than any separate piece, because the piece is only in it if it fits the spirit of the publication. I think Substack is very much the person writing, and you see it all the time. I mean, I'm one other person who writes is Joyce Wadlow, who was a great New York Times columnist for a while, and she's always writing kind of outrageous things now and putting in a little banner that says she couldn't write. You wouldn't have read this in the New York Times. Subscribe.
See, exactly. That's what I mean. She's like thrown away all the, parameters, right?
That's right. And I
yeah.
guess Tara too. But that was the New York Times. So, yeah, I can understand how they feel, but I'm not so sure I feel that way.
Now, speaking of the New York Times, during my conversation with Tara, I quoted you. I said, yeah, my good friend Myrna Blyth, she recently said to me that 3% of journalists work at the New York Times. 97% of them wish they worked at the New York Times. You told me that recently, and I thought that was a
I think
great
it's
quote.
8% that work at the New York Times and 92%.
Oh, is that right? Oh, I
It's even
misquoted
more.
you.
The New York Times has won online to a degree that no other publication has. It
Absolutely.
has absolute won. It's built an ecosystem that's beyond simply reporting the news, though, of course, at this time, the news is very important. But even in periods where it has not been so changing and having to keep up, it's supplied recipes, it's supplied Wirecutter, it supplied Wordle. So it created a whole ecosystem. Nobody's quite been able to do that, but it's also done that with a great amount of money and a commitment from the top down to create such a project online. I don't think the other newspapers have quite done that. Certainly the Washington Post has not. The Wall Street Journal is pretty good and is probably second in that class, but it is very hard because everything else is kind of splintered online. So it's very hard to compete.
Yeah, really is. I mean, I know the New York Times is my go-to. I read the other ones as well, but I find very fascinating reading anything online if they offer comments and where you can read the comments, because that gives you such great insight into who that audience really is.
Yes. Yes.
Right. We have a really good idea of how the New York Times audience leans politically, I think, just from reading the comments.
Well, the New York Times is very clear. It's politics. And
very clear. Yeah. Yeah.
papers in America used to claim that they were unbiased, that all the news that's fit to print. There is great bias in newspapers. And the conservative press, when it started, or Fox, certainly had a point, saying most mainstream media was much more liberal than it was middle of the road. And the Times is very clear what it is. In England, papers say they are Tory or conservative papers or Labour papers. They make it clear. Our papers don't, but it is pretty clear their politics, the Wall Street Journal, the Times. The Wall Street Journal, oddly enough, I think is less in the way it reports than the New York Times. And now there's this new paper, the Free Press, or this online organization that has very clear parameters, but makes it clear to you what they support.
And do you think there's any news organization out there that we could read or watch that is unbiased right now?
Some people think AP or Reuters, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
Where they just kind of tell you what's going, like really just report the news. Like, does anybody do that?
I think, yes, maybe AP and Reuters, but at the same time, there's bias in everything. Just picking what is the news shows somewhat of a bias. However, in some ways, I think we have more news and less insight. And the other thing that bothers me, which I just wrote in my piece on the fog of news and the fog of war, when you get notifications on the phone, everything seems of equal importance, whether it's about Meghan and Harry, or it's a health tip, which you're supplying, or it's
or we're counting down to the end of the world with
it's the end of the world and followed by a recipe. So
yes, exactly.
It's very strange now, and yet that's the way the world is. So we have to live in it and
Yeah,
accept it.
which is why everyone listening, you've got to read that particular post. And of course, there will be links in the show notes. So definitely check that out. So let's segue over to one of my favorite topics of all time, aging. Yeah,
Okay.
I do like to focus on that because I am, well, we all are, no matter what age we are, of course. But I'm sure you and I can agree that you don't start really thinking about that word and what that means until you actually are in midlife, perhaps 50s, 60s, whatever. I have been focusing on it ever since I turned 50. All of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, what? I'm 50. I better figure this out. What do I do now? I need a book. And that's when I wrote my first book because it
Yeah,
really
I
wasn't
know.
such a guide. And that's when I actually started, thanks to you, working with AARP, which I still do all these years later. It's been about 16 years.
That's great.
Yep. Yeah, it's
Great.
incredible. But I do want to talk about that because I think the whole concept of aging and how we talk about aging has changed over the years and the decades. Let's go back to you, Myrna. You started More Magazine.
Yes.
I was in the publishing world. That was my career at that time when it came out. I was like, wow, that's amazing.
And more
Tell us
was
about
for
that and who it was for. What
women
the
over
age was.
40, because that was
40.
considered aging then. And I
I
would
still
see now, I would say even 50, even though people do talk about it, I would say even 50 is not exactly that aging because people tend to look great at 50, feel great, etc. I think aging probably now starts 20 years less, 60. I think
I
people
think
begin
60.
to
Let's go
start
with that.
thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I mean, I did start thinking about it because there were some changes that happened to me. And I did start thinking, oh, wow. And menopause was part of
Sure.
that. And luckily, because of all these big voices in that space now, it is being talked about a lot. And then by association, through osmosis, aging is being discussed more. But there are different ways to think about it, which I'll get to in a minute. But let's get back to More Magazine for a minute. I mean, it didn't continue. I mean, it didn't. Was it ahead of its time, Myrna? Was it ahead of its time? Like what?
No,
Or what?
well, first of all, magazines and print all have suffered. I mean, there's hardly
Yeah,
any now,
that's
and
true.
they're thin remnants of what they were. And I'm more practically was started by Meredith, which the journal had done very well. They agreed to do more, etc. But Meredith did not have the beauty and fashion advertising that a magazine like More needed. It might have done a lot better if it was published by Condé Nast. But at the moment, magazines are a memory, a kind of buggy whip of information, which is unfortunate because I do look at my old ladies journals to write some of my Substack. And wow, there was a lot in those magazines. I mean, they were 200 pages thick of everything: health, beauty, fashion, decorating, cooking, celebrity, and journalism. We could still break stories at that time. But the way of the world, the way of the web. And so that stopped. So I think More probably would have faded even if it had been published by Condé Nast, which has magazines are fading or have, a lot of them are gone. But I think it was particularly hampered by being published by Meredith. So grateful that it was published at all.
Yeah, good point. So, what really replaced in your mind magazines, the actual print magazine? Of course, many of them have gone online, they're online only.
They're not exactly like magazines online. I mean, people online is, I think, flourishing, but people in print, which used to sell and be so powerful, and more example that kind of poignant of someone who worked for me and then went on to be the publisher of Cosmopolitan said, oh, that nowadays people think Cosmopolitan is kind of a website, a small website. I mean, Cosmopolitan was probably the most successful monthly magazine that was ever published, but it just doesn't mean anything. people like magazines. That when you give them a magazine, ARP, they love their magazine. They don't want it to go away. A magazine is a great thing because online you look for what interests you. In a magazine, some things interested you, you were sure of, but then you found things you didn't know you were interested in, but they were so available. All you had to do was turn the page and you were there. That's not the way the web works. You look for what you want on the web, or it comes to you like a Substack newsletter to you. So it's just very different. And it's unfortunate. And I mean, of course, what hurt magazines, since you were in publishing, it was the business plan, which you didn't ask the reader to pay for the magazine. You asked advertisers to pay for the magazine. And once they had a internet where they could go directly to someone and know who that person was to a degree that they never could in a magazine, the advertising began to move. That's all.
Right. No, it's very interesting. And I actually left the publishing world really probably at a good time before it really started to fall apart, and went into the international conference business. Also very interesting. But this whole thing about aging, let's get back to that. So More Magazine, and I'm about to turn 70 in a few months at the end of the year. So I'm kind of looking at that and going,
it's a party, Barbara.
I know, don't worry, you will be the first to be invited if there is such a thing. I'm viewing it as sort of like the same thing when I turned 50, although I turned 50 and then went, wait a minute, what? In this case, I feel like I'm preparing myself for the turn to 70 and then what's after that. And that's like the episode that we're doing today. It's part of my mini series called The Road to 70. And I have all these amazing people on once a month to talk about, yeah, Barbara, this is what you need to do. And cardiologists and exercise people, and I had Laura Geller on telling me about makeup. That's going to be appropriate for me. She's great. In fact, I have it right now.
I think the 60s are, as we've discussed, a decision decade in a lot of ways. I think just practically, many people retire in their 60s. They have to retire. Their organizations really have set up systems so they are encouraged to retire. Of course, you start entering the two benefits that the country grants older people, Medicare and Social Security. And you have to make a lot of decisions about that. I think that's significant. I also think it's hard to say and nowadays I think very easily you can say in your 50s, I'm middle-aged, and you probably are. People now live until their mid-80s. That's kind of an expected lifespan for women in this country and women in many parts of the world. For men, it's slightly less. But when you start hitting your 70s, it doesn't have to be the fourth quarter, but unless you want to expect to live a very long life, it's beginning to be a different stage in your life. Now, a lot of people today really want to fight that. And that's a choice. And I certainly can understand it. I certainly understand that we are told constantly that we can do things to make ourselves healthy in that decade or those decades. And I'm sure exercise, nutrition, being conscientious about tests and everything have made people healthier. They really have. I also think there's a real encouragement to stop being the person you always were. And I think that's great too. At the same time, it seems to me kind of shallow, as if not accepting that it is a new stage in your life, just as adolescence was a stage, young adulthood was a stage, middle age was a stage too. So I think it's kind of a balance of really getting an A+ in aging and also being a little more thoughtful about it can be a new experience that has some meaning, and making sure one focuses on the meaning as well as the keeping on being how one was. I think that's really the balance that people need, especially through their 70s and as they get older.
I just recently interviewed for AARP, actually, that'll be coming out in a few months, Dr. Carrie Burnite. She's a gerontologist, a lovely person. She has a 97-year-old mother who is featured very often in her Instagram posts as a great example. But she basically agrees with everything you just said. Her whole position and the name of her book is Joy Span. Like, she thinks we spend too much time talking about lifespan and health span, and the health span is really important, of course. Lifespan is like, well, let's see what happens there. But health span, there's a lot in our control there, as I truly believe. But she feels, hey, if you have this life that is longer, but if you're not enjoying it, if it doesn't have meaning, if you're not recognizing that things are different now, as you just pointed out, you're not the same person. I know that for a fact, Myrna. I say it all the time. I've
That's
told you.
interesting. You really feel you have changed. I know you've said that.
Absolutely. I am the first to tell you. I know I told you that. I tell people all the time. I am different now. I'm 69 than I was back in my 50s when I was doing this and doing that and writing that and blah, blah. Yes, for sure.
And I think that's really great because I do know if I'm going to be on a panel, I'm not going to say where, with a group of people who are absolutely convinced that you have to keep achieving in the same way, that you get your satisfaction by being as much like you have always been and that is true. That's real proof that you're, as I say, getting an A
Succeeding.
plus at aging.
I like it, right. Or successful aging. That's another term that's often
Yes.
bandied
Or
about.
even, I have a real thing about what I call the longevity gurus, the people
yeah.
who the 100 is the new 30. 100 is not the new 30.
Yeah.
Believe me, if you've ever met anyone who's even in their 90s, it's not the new 40. That you'll find out. What I'm trying to say is there has to be kind of knowing what has given you satisfaction your whole life. And I think that's important in your work and your relationships, etc. And trying to keep that satisfaction, but not maybe to the way it was. For example, I left AARP, and as I said, they were surprised. It was a buyout of the company, and I have nothing but positive things to say about AARP. And they were kind of surprised. But one of the reasons was I was managing people who were literally younger than my children. Now, they were fine, and I think they respected me, etc. But the ones who were ambitious, I'm not that ambitious anymore. You can't be. The ones who weren't, I couldn't make ambition because I wasn't, if you manage by example, that ambitious person I had once been. So it seemed to me I was not being fair to the people I was managing. And I had to accept that. That was an acceptance. So in a way, I left. I could have been selfish and say, I'm staying here to carry me out. My son used to say, you're there, Mom, till Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Well, that didn't work out. Then he kept saying, you're there till Grassley, Mom. And Grassley's still there, God bless him. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't think that was right. And I had to accept that. And when I accepted that and did leave, I also had to accept I had to find some things for myself that would give me some of the satisfaction I had had in work. And it's interesting, especially for this other panel, but one of the things, at one moment I was kind of down, and after a month of swimming and seeing friends and going to barbecues, I said I was down to a friend, and she said, oh, you miss the power. And I said, I don't miss the power. I miss the responsibility. And so I knew I had to get something in my life that gave me responsibility. So writing a weekly Substack.
And some structure also, it sounds like, too. I know that's
Writing,
important to me.
working on my doctorate.
Yes.
you have to write papers, you have to show up for class, you have to be prepared for class. I felt that was helpful. Would I want to go back and manage 150 people? I don't think so. And yet I had done it for years and years and was good
And
at
you
it.
could do it again. Like, we know that you could, if you needed to for some reason, you
Well, I
could
think
do
that's
it.
hard. And that's the
But
other thing. I
it's
think
not,
the
you
hard
don't want to
thing,
do that is the point.
I think that's hard for people in their 60s if they go into their 70s because things are shut off for them in terms of work. And so if you work for an organization, it's pretty well shut off for you. You'd retire in your 60s, even your late 60s. The only people who can keep working are doctors, not surgeons, we hope,
Right. Right.
lawyers, and people who run their own business. So yes, you can do that. And if you're an artist or a writer, but most people can't. So part of it is trying to find the things that gave them those satisfactions in different situations. And that can be challenging. Oddly enough, I am writing a paper for my doctorate class, and I don't know if I'll use it for a dissertation, but it's a good subject on ageism. Ageism, the word was only created by a man named Robert Butler, Dr. Robert Butler, in the late 1960s. And it was created in a conversation he was having with a fledgling reporter of the Washington Post named Carl Bernstein. He was talking about Chevy Chase, Maryland. The residents did not want to have built there a group home for the elderly. And he got so upset when he said talking to Bernstein, he said, it's disgraceful. It's like racism. It's ageism. And no one had ever used the word before.
Wow.
It became in Bernstein's article and on the front page of the Washington Post. And people use the word now ever since. But there has been ageism since man started getting older. Interesting. Ageism has increased as more and more people have gotten older because there weren't that many people for you to be ageist about in the past. And in truth, it's complicated because there was always ageism about the poor. If you were rich and powerful man, you had
got away with aging.
What?
You got away with aging.
Unless you were King Lear, which is a
Okay.
perfect demonstration of giving up power and being affected by ageism.
Right.
And women, especially older women alone, have always suffered from ageism, and it's always been kind of dangerous for them. But so what I'm saying is it's really complicated. So as there are more and more older people, ageism is not only the way people feel towards the old, it's the way the old feel towards themselves. And we are seeing, as people say, a feeling, an internalizing of it, like racism.
Yeah.
Not sexism so much, but even sexism. Women thinking they couldn't compete because they were women. So it's really interesting. And of course, it's one prejudice that affects everyone, black, white, man, or woman.
Right.
Everyone's affected by ageism.
But you said something a few minutes ago when you were talking that you feel that it's gotten worse. I'm paraphrasing you
I
now. But
think it's gotten worse.
You don't think it's gotten better, even with all of this talk about longevity and acceptance of aging?
Just think of all the people in their late 50s at the moment who can't get jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. It affects people from their 50s on when it comes to the most important thing in many people's lives, a way to earn a living. I mean, people in their 50s constantly say, I send in resumes and never get a call back. Certainly after 55, even though we know people are going to live another 30 years. So it's really an interesting problem. And all the laws about retirement increased as people's lifespans increase.
I think you should consider writing your dissertation
On ageism, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating.
I recommend anyone who wants to spend hours reading a book. The basic book about age is Simone de Beauvoir's The Coming of Age. And it is a remarkable book. It's 800 pages and and it is really a history of age and her own. And there is nothing she says in it that is still not true. I mean, the real issue is we have expanded human life 20 to 30 years, certainly in America, most of Western Europe, in Japan, in China, in many of the world. But the society has not really adjusted to it. Our health system has not adjusted. Our work system has not adjusted.
No.
And people, all the things we're seeing about people trying to figure it out. You saying, what do I do when I'm 70? That's part of this new fascination and new need to really try to figure this out, both for society, for the health system, certainly, and for people individually.
So can I go so far as to say you applaud me a little bit for wanting to try to figure it out before I get to 70?
I'm not sure you can figure it out. I would say, I know you're doing all the right things about your health. I know you are, honestly, you're going to keep doing your podcasting in your 70s. You're going to do a 70 into 80. But I also think you, who are a really optimistic and positive person, will see the benefits of some things in those years that maybe traveling more or spending less time doing something and doing more time doing something else, or finding a new interest completely to pursue as well. I think it's really hard as you get older to be flexible, and yet being flexible is probably what you need to do more than anything. Try things and not beat yourself up and not keep trying to do the same thing in the same way you did before, because that can be very frustrating for people.
I want to go back to Dr. Burnite, the gerontologist who wrote what is now a New York Times bestselling book, Joyce Ban. She's so lovely. And she will be on the podcast actually in a couple of weeks. But she has a few things that she says we must all do as we move forward in life with our age, as we get older. And one of them is growth. That's a really big pillar for her. It's exactly what you're saying. That's what you're saying, really, is to grow, meaning you're not just going to keep on doing the same old, same old. It sounds to me like the people who are hosting, if that's the right word, the event at which you will be speaking soon on a panel, that they left their, I think, very high-powered jobs. I mean, that's my understanding, right? Kind of very successful people, and they've left, who knows why, under what circumstances, we don't know that, but they've left and now they've moved on and they want to recreate. They want to recreate what they had. I mean, it's like what Tara Parker Pope says, don't look back, look forward. And it sounds like that's kind of like what they're trying to do.
I also think that baby boomers, early baby boomers, were going to change the world, the women. And they did. They did. They changed the world. I'd be interested now, Generation Xers, and you're not quite a Generation Xer. You're the youngest boomer, right?
I'm the absolute youngest, like the last year, yeah.
The last. All right. I'd be interested in how Generation X's feel as they go from their 60s to 70s, especially about work. Remember, boomers, especially older boomers, wanted to work. We were going to show them. And I'm not even a boomer. I'm a generation that nobody time has forgot. But anyways, they really had a mission. I wonder if Generation Xers, they knew they were going to work. They had to work. There was no question about it. So I'm not sure giving up work will be as upsetting because they've been working and told they had to work and everything like that. So I just don't know. I just wonder. And the other thing, I think I used to say when I ran the journal and more at the same time, the women who read the journal, the women who read more were very different. Women who read the journal had jobs. They were happy when they retired. They were happy to change totally, to focus more on their family, focus more on often church, which was very meaningful, their religious life, to focus on crafts, to focus on volunteering. They were very happy that the more women were career women.
Yeah.
It became much more difficult. The way I used to sum it up was the journal women watched Oprah. The more women wanted to be on Oprah, better they wanted to be Oprah. So you come into those years with different expectations of your past. And I think keep figuring out how to keep what you like the best in a new circumstance is really, really the goal. And it's bumpy. And I think people have different, and some people are lucky and some people are not. But I'm not worried about you, Barb. I know you're going to be great. 70. But I do
Oh, good.
think
Yay.
60 is the decision decade that at one time maybe the 40s were, or life begins at 40. It sounds like a joke now, or it was a joke, or life begins at 50 now is even a joke. It's a new life begins at 70, or a new way of living. And that may be true. That may be.
And I agree with that, which is why I'm so focused right now on a lot of what I'm doing and studying and the people I'm interviewing on the 60s decade, because I do believe to be really ready for your 70s and to be set up to do all these great things that you've been talking about, Myrna, to really maybe think about doing other things, like grow a little bit, try something new, travel more, whatever you want to do, instead of just repeating what you've been doing in just a different context.
For example, when I left the journal, it was in my 60s. And when I got my job at ARP, it was my 70s. And in between, I'd written 2 books and I wrote my column. And I'm sorry now I didn't travel more with my husband, though we had both traveled a lot in our lives. But in a way, I really do wish it was that we had not gone on the Orient Express, not gone to Australia, where he had one place he had never been. I've never been. So in a way, I think starting in your 70s is figuring out your healthy years and what you do with them before there will be years where you will not be as healthy. And I
Right.
think that's hard too, because we're told now that we can totally control our health to the last moment. And of course, that isn't true. So it
No.
really seems to me, I would tell people in their 70s, and if you're feeling really good, do the things you probably won't be able to do in your 80s or 90s.
Yeah. This is what's so interesting to me, too, is that when you're in your 30s, 40s, even 50s, you don't think that way. You
No.
don't think that way. You don't think, oh, I better go make that trip now on the Orient Express,
And you probably don't
because
have to in your 50s or even your 60s.
no, probably not. It's a reality. It really is a reality.
It's a form of ageism, of course, this idea that aging is a lifestyle choice and not a biological inevitability. Aging is an inevitability, and I run marathons like you, God bless you, but at the same time, it makes more sense to know you probably will have more health issues as you get at the end of your 70s, your 80s. I mean, a friend of mine who's just had a prostate operation, a cataract operation, whatever, he said he hit the skids in his 70s. That's how he put it. He's okay now that he's done all these things. But what I'm saying is, it's okay to be realistic. You're not keeping up the good face by saying maybe we ought to go to Australia now because maybe we won't be able to go in 3 years. And why not?
That's right. However, I just want to stick in this caveat. It's not even a caveat, but I really do believe, that there are steps that we can all be taking throughout life. But listen, I also believe never too late to start. I really believe that. And I think that the 60s are kind of, I don't want to say like the last time you can really make a difference, but it's important that you really focus a little bit more on some of those steps that you can take to try to be as healthy as you can. Because I believe in the power of the health span. I don't think about the lifespan. I never think about the lifespan. I think about the health span so that I can travel happily and comfortably to Australia, even in my late 70s if I want,
Oh, the
or
late
80s.
70s, absolutely. I'm really
Yeah.
talking about what happens to people certainly in their 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, exactly.
nothing one can do really, though we hear there are things one can do for diseases like heart disease. And yes, once you have it, or cancer, or dementia, let's be honest. I just celebrated a birthday, and as I say, I have two friends who I went to grade school with. One I don't hear about anymore. I talk about how I spent my 16th birthday with them, and one is deep in dementia. She can't communicate. And the other's husband has Alzheimer, and that's a
Yeah.
reality.
It's a
I
reality.
would say the other reality, which I'd love to have a discussion with Tara or someone about, we've done great things to increase the lifespan and the health span in terms of diseases like cancer and heart disease. We've done very little for the things that bother people day to day when they are older,
Like knee arthritis,
like
perhaps.
arthritis,
Yep.
like hearing. Almost everyone gets deaf at some point. Oh, few people are not deaf, and hearing aids are a pretty old-fashioned way of dealing with it. Almost everyone has some kind of eye trouble as they get older. Dry eyes is now the more older people, more and more dry eyes, which nobody can help, really. They have no way. They just have ways to assuage it, but not to cure it. So I would say bones, eyes, hearing is what affects you as you get older and older. It would be nice if someone did more things, but there's no drugs for that, and there's no big research projects for that.
Exactly. So, like, follow the money. The money is not going toward, and I don't understand why. I guess because there's a lot of money in all the medications and the surgeries.
And also because the health system has not really recognized the real issues of this enormous population with this 30 more years of life and what those years are. I mean, it was interesting. I was reading something, I guess it was in the New Yorker, and it then went to Calvin Tompkins' piece about being 100. And of course, as you read it, it was a diary of him being at 100. And first of all, you begin to realize it. You realize he didn't write it. His wife wrote it because he is almost blind. I'm sure it was his thoughts, but the putting it down in a way it could be published, he has terrible hearing problems. He has terrible vision. I think he goes blind during the discussion. He has a stroke and has trouble talking. So all I'm just saying, and it's fascinating, and he's 100, but it's a fair description of what happens to the body and what you have to contend with. Now, I don't know if anything could cure that at 100, but there are lots of people in their 80s with arthritis, deafness, and trouble seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. It's mind boggling to me that they haven't been able to figure out how to fix knee arthritis without replacing the knee.
Exactly.
Like without, because it's a cartilage thing. Just build the
When they're
cartilage.
talking that someone is growing it somewhere.
Yes, I've seen that, but it's not available to us.
I mean, I live on the Upper West Side of New York, and
Yeah.
there are more walkers canes, poles, carts. And God bless them. I mean, people are out walking, and I really respect them. But it's hard to get around for many, many people. And that affects you every moment. While having cancer is awful, but most people, until they get really sick, they don't even know they have cancer. When you know you can't walk across the street, you know it. So that's another thing. I think that's kind of interesting.
That's another
But you're
thing
a
I think
Barbara.
that, yeah.
Doesn't happen for decades.
No. Oh my gosh. Hey, before we move on, you mentioned traveling a few times. I have to bring this up, Myrna, because it is still so mind-boggling to me. I did mention that we met, like I knew of you, I saw you from afar for decades, but we actually met, about 16 years ago, let's say. But as it turns out, that's not really true.
No.
We had dinner one night, and I don't remember who mentioned it first. I think I may have said, "Oh, yeah." So I was on the QE2. It was the last run of the
It's the first
QE2.
voyage after the Falklands. Yes. And the
Correct.
QE2 had a problem.
Please, you tell, because I forget the details of that trip. Like, I think I said to you, "Yeah, we broke down off the coast of Devon." And
That's
then you
right.
said,
It was Portsmouth.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Devon, yeah.
But it was Devon. And then, well, anyway, everyone listening, and so I think I brought this up that, yeah, this was back in the 80s. And I was on that ship with my then husband, my first husband. I was married very briefly to someone actually Myrna knew. So we have a lot of connections,
Yeah.
Myrna, over the years. It's kind of crazy. And I was so excited. And it was my first cruise of any kind. And oh my God, it was the QE2.
It wasn't a cruise. It was really coming back to America. It was a passage,
Exactly.
a transit, yeah.
In transit, right, after the Falklands. And it broke down. It broke down like almost immediately, like that night, the first night. And so it had to stay off the coast of Devon and for 5 days.
Well,
But anyway,
my husband was on it and my son, but
Right.
I flew home from the
Right, that's the
RAF
thing.
base because I had to come home to fire people because a new owner, among many owners of the Journal, had just bought the Journal, and I had to come home and fire people. So my kids, who love ships, in fact, I am going on a ship this summer. I hope I cope with it. With my grandson, who is 16, we are going together on a cruise in the Baltics from Copenhagen to Copenhagen. And just he and I, because I have traveled with his family, and we both decided, nope, just us. So we are going on a cruise. We love ships, and I've been on many ships. But you said, oh, I was on the worst voyage ever. And I said, oh, I know that voyage.
Yeah, it was so funny, but we stayed off the coast for about 5 more days, and they had to scramble.
They had to
get
bring
the
in
food
shipbuilders from
Yes.
the Tyne. And my husband came from Newcastle on Tyne, so he understood this perfectly. They had to bring people down from the north of England to fix Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was in all the newspapers. I mean, don't forget, at that time, there were no cell phones. I had a job. I was running, associate director, ad director of some magazine at that time, and I had to get back. And I forget even how I communicated with my boss about, hey, I'm stuck on the QE2.
That I don't even remember, but I do remember I flew home from an RAF base. They put on a plane at an RAF base for us to go back and do terrible things. My kids love staying on board. They love ships, so, they were happy.
Do they remember that?
Oh, sure.
They do. I mean, they have a memory of it.
Oh, absolutely. They
So
weren't
Graham
that
and
young. They were maybe
I know your son, Graham. I've met both of your sons.
Or even more, 12 and 9. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, I've met both of your sons, but I keep forgetting, anytime I speak to Graham, I keep forgetting to say, hey,
that's right.
You and I were on that ship together.
Yeah,
we
were
each other
in the Queen's Lounge or the Princess Lounge, the fancy place where you ate, where they'd make special food for you. And by the end, the waiters were so bored, they were making pizza for the kids and sharing the pizza. They loved it, though. They loved it.
Yeah, no, it was very, very special, I have to say. So just getting back to aging one more time before we move on. Such a complicated thing, as you've said a few times. It's complicated, it's confusing. I think I got a lot of clarity just now with our conversation about aging. I really, really do. And so I do appreciate that. Hey, Myrna, I've kept you here with me for a long time, holding my hand.
I hope people are not falling asleep all over.
No, this is so much fun. Listen, every time we get together for dinner or lunch or talk on the phone, I always have a good time.
Well, I'm glad. And
Always.
we must do it again. And I'm looking forward for you coming back to the city.
Before I let you go, can you just give me a little bit of advice as I'm inching my way towards 70? Do you have like 1 or 2 or 3 tips or top takeaways from things that we talked about today you want to make sure I remember so that I kind of leave my 60s with a bang and enter my 70s with an equally big bang?
I think you've already made the right decisions. So during this decision decade, which we both agree the 60s are, I think having an optimistic nature, being positive about every day, the future, optimism and self-respect, really respecting yourself and saying, I'm making decisions or I'm not doing something, and respecting yourself as you get older. As I say, that's really the ageism we get about ourselves, losing almost respect for the person we've become. So I think it's really important as you get older to keep your self-respect and your optimism.
Thank you for that. I think that helps me to be resilient. And as I've read in so many studies and books, resilience is an essential ingredient of aging.
Yes, but resilience always sounds to me like you're fighting something and not having those same criteria. As I said, I just did a podcast and God, I looked awful. I looked much better on yours. And so what? So what?
Yeah,
That
so
my
what?
guest was good. We're going to use it. I mean, it's fine. I think having a kind of positive and
Is a bit of acceptance also, is really
yeah,
what self-respect, but acceptance of this change, as you and I've been saying for all this time. It is different, and accepting that, and not in a defeatist way. See, that's really very important to me. Like, oh, okay, well, then this is how it is.
surveys tend to say that people get happier as they get older. That's what all those things. There are some people who say that's because all the unhappy people have died, and so the only others are left. I've always said, if you're happier in your 80s than you were earlier, then you had one miserable life. But there are people who
Okay,
definitely
I
get
have a new
happier.
job for you. You're going to be a stand-up comedian.
Now,
We can-
I do think there are people who feel freer, who don't have, say, a husband telling them what to do, the burdens of work or taking care of kids or taking care of parents, being caregivers who are gone. So I do think some people genuinely get happier as they get older. And if you don't, then I think being optimistic, having self-acceptance, self-respect helps you to be as positive as possible.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Myrna, this was so much fun. So I hope you'll come back on because
I'd love to.
we could go on. There's a lot to talk about.
Yes, we could. I'd love to. And Barbara, I read all your health tips every day. And I was going to say, what about those peptides? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for
Thank you
having me.
so much. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. See you next week. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode of Age Better Podcast, please do a few things. First, share it with all your friends and family. Then, subscribe to Age Better wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, so you never miss a single episode. Finally, if you have ideas for topics you want me to cover in a future episode of Age Better, send an email to agebetterpodcast@gmail.com or reach out to me on social media. Until next time, remember this: we can't control getting older, but we can control how we do it. Talk to you soon. Age Better Podcast is a proud member of the Sound Advice Network. Sound Advice, women's voices amplified.